On the surface, China and North Korea seem inseparable. They present a united front, their shared history and ideology binding them together. The world sees images of handshakes, diplomatic visits, and pronouncements of eternal friendship. China, the elder sibling, provides economic aid and political backing to North Korea. North Korea, in turn, acts as a buffer, shielding China from the influence of the West. But what lies beneath this carefully curated facade? Is this a genuine alliance or a calculated performance masking deeper truths? Behind the smiles and the official statements, a deep-seated mistrust simmers. The history between China and North Korea is not one of unwavering friendship but one of suspicion, rivalry, and strategic maneuvering. An old North Korean saying lays bare this sentiment. Japan is our enemy for 100 years, but China is our enemy for 1,000 years. While North Korea publicly acknowledges China as an ally, behind closed doors, a different story unfolds. The legacy of past betrayals and power struggles continues to color their interactions. North Korea, wary of being controlled, remembers periods when China exerted its dominance. China, for its part, harbors anxieties about North Korea's unpredictable behavior and its nuclear ambitions. The specter of a nuclear-armed neighbor, prone to provocation, keeps Chinese strategists up at night. This undercurrent of mistrust is the invisible force shaping the relationship between these two nations. To understand the dynamics at play, we need to recognize the power imbalance. China, with its economic might and global influence, dwarfs North Korea. This disparity creates a relationship where China often assumes the role of the protector, while North Korea finds itself in the position of the protege. North Korea, fiercely independent and proud of its self-reliance, chafes under the weight of its larger neighbor's influence. While accepting economic aid and political cover, North Korea remains wary of becoming overly dependent on China. Nowhere is this balancing act more evident than in the issue of North Korea's nuclear ambitions. China has long been uncomfortable with its neighbor's pursuit of nuclear weapons. A nuclear-armed North Korea, prone to unpredictable behavior, represents a significant security threat, not just to the region but to China itself. Despite these concerns, China has been reluctant to take drastic measures against North Korea. Completely cutting off aid or support could destabilize the regime, leading to chaos and potentially its collapse. China's strategy, therefore, has been one of containment and control. It seeks to keep North Korea on a tight leash, providing just enough aid to prevent its collapse while simultaneously trying to restrain its most provocative actions. Kim Jong-un, determined to solidify his grip on power, has shown a willingness to defy China's wishes. This defiance has tested China's patience, putting Beijing in the awkward position of condemning North Korea's actions publicly, while continuing to provide a lifeline behind the scenes. The year 2017 marked a turning point in the China-North Korea relationship, a year when tensions escalated to unprecedented levels. Kim Jong-un, emboldened by his growing nuclear arsenal, seemed determined to force the world and particularly the United States to recognize North Korea as a legitimate nuclear power. His actions, however, would put him on a collision course with China. The testing of intercontinental ballistic missiles, capable of reaching the U.S. mainland, crossed a red line for Beijing. China had long warned North Korea against such provocations, fearing they could spark a conflict that would inevitably draw in China. The world watched with bated breath, wondering if Kim Jong-un's gamble would backfire, plunging the Korean peninsula and potentially the world into war. Kim Jong-un's actions were not those of a reckless madman, but of a shrewd strategist playing a high-stakes game. He understood that China, despite its disapproval, was unlikely to abandon its ally completely. Kim's calculation was that by raising the stakes, by making himself appear both dangerous and unpredictable, he could force the United States to the negotiating table. He believed that with China's tacit support, he could extract concessions from the West, securing his regime's survival and cementing its status as a nuclear power. China, caught between its desire for stability and its disapproval of North Korea's actions, found itself in a difficult position. China's response to North Korea's provocations was a mix of public condemnation and behind-the-scenes pressure. While officially denouncing the missile tests, China also began to take steps to protect its own interests. It increased its military presence along the North Korean border, deploying troops and equipment as a precautionary measure. Economically, China began to tighten the screws on North Korea, limiting fuel and food exports. These actions were intended to send a clear message to Pyongyang. China was losing patience, and continued defiance would come at a cost. As tensions between North Korea and the world reached a fever pitch in early 2017, A shocking event unfolded far from the Korean peninsula. On February 13th at the bustling Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Kim Jong-nam, the estranged half-brother of Kim Jong-un, was assassinated. Two women, later identified as Indonesian and Vietnamese nationals, approached Kim Jong-nam in the airport terminal and swiftly smeared a nerve agent, later identified as VX, on his face. The attack, captured on grainy security camera footage, was as brazen as it was ruthless. Kim Jong-nam, once considered a potential successor to his father, Kim Jong-il, had been living in exile, under the protection of Chinese authorities. He had publicly criticized his half-brother's regime and was seen by some as a potential alternative leader should the Kim dynasty falter. His assassination was a brutal reminder that Kim Jong-un would tolerate no dissent, even from within his own family. The assassination of Kim Jong-nam was not just a family feud, it was a calculated political act with profound implications for the China-North Korea relationship. By eliminating his half-brother, Kim Jong-un was sending a clear message, not just to his own people but also to the international community, and most importantly, to China. The message was twofold. First, it was a demonstration of Kim Jong-un's ruthlessness and his willingness to use extreme measures to eliminate his rivals and silence his critics. Second, and perhaps more significantly, it was a direct challenge to China's influence in North Korea. By assassinating Kim Jong-nam on foreign soil, Kim Jong-un was signaling his defiance of Beijing's wishes. The assassination was a turning point, a moment when the fragile trust between the two countries was shattered. China's response to the assassination was swift and decisive, reflecting the gravity of the situation. Beijing immediately condemned the attack and launched its own investigation into the incident. While China stopped short of directly accusing North Korea of orchestrating the assassination, the implication was clear. The incident put a significant strain on the China-North Korea relationship. Kim Jong-un had shown that he was willing to defy China's wishes, even if it meant jeopardizing their relationship. The assassination also had broader geopolitical implications, raising questions about China's ability to control its unpredictable ally. The assassination of Kim Jong-nam was a turning point, but it was only the beginning of a series of events that would further escalate tensions between China and North Korea. Kim Jong-un, emboldened by his defiance, continued to test missiles at an alarming rate, each launch a calculated provocation designed to test the limits of China's patience and the resolve of the international community. These were not just routine tests, they were carefully orchestrated displays of military might intended to send a message. The missiles were larger, more powerful, and capable of traveling further than ever before. Some analysts believed that North Korea was on the verge of developing a nuclear-tipped missile capable of reaching the continental United States. China watched these developments with growing alarm, realizing the potential threat to its own national security. As North Korea's missile tests became more frequent and more sophisticated, a chilling realization began to dawn on Chinese military planners. The trajectory of some of these test missiles, if reversed, put the heart of China within range. Major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, home to tens of millions of people, were suddenly vulnerable to a potential North Korean strike. This was not just a theoretical threat, it was a strategic calculation that sent shivers down the spines of China's leaders. For decades, China had viewed North Korea as a buffer, a shield against the West. Now it seemed that shield had transformed into a potential threat. Faced with this new reality, China's response was measured but firm. While still advocating for a diplomatic solution to the North Korea crisis, Beijing began to take concrete steps to protect its own interests. The People's Liberation Army, China's military, discreetly stepped up its presence along the North Korean border. Troops were deployed, military exercises were conducted, and new equipment, including advanced missile defense systems, was moved into position. These were not merely symbolic gestures, they were a clear signal to Pyongyang that China was prepared to defend itself. The relationship between the two countries had reached a crossroads and the future remained uncertain. The events of 2017 were a wake-up call for China. Kim Jong-un's brazen actions, his willingness to defy China's wishes and risk regional stability, forced Beijing to reassess its long-held assumptions about its relationship with North Korea. The old playbook, the one that relied on containment, economic support, and quiet diplomacy, was no longer sufficient. The ground had shifted, and China needed a new strategy. Chinese state media, once careful to toe the party line on North Korea, began to publish articles critical of Kim Jong-un's leadership. These were not the usual boilerplate pronouncements of concern. They were sharper, more pointed, hinting at a growing frustration within the Chinese leadership. Then came the economic measures, with China restricting trade in key areas like coal and iron ore to pressure the North Korean economy. China's economic leverage over North Korea was significant. As North Korea's largest trading partner, China provided the isolated regime with a vital source of hard currency and essential goods. By tightening the screws on trade, China could inflict real pain on the North Korean economy, potentially undermining Kim Jong-un's grip on power. The restrictions were carefully calibrated, designed to send a message without causing a complete collapse of the North Korean state. China was walking a tightrope, trying to pressure Kim Jong-un without pushing him over the edge. The impact of these economic measures was felt almost immediately. The message was clear: China was willing to use its economic might to rein in its wayward ally. The price of defiance was becoming increasingly clear to Kim Jong-un. His nuclear brinkmanship had brought him international condemnation and tightened sanctions, but it had also strained his relationship with China, his most important benefactor. The once unwavering support from Beijing was no longer a given. Kim Jong-un faced a dilemma. He could continue on his current course, pursuing his nuclear ambitions at all costs, but at the risk of further alienating China and facing even greater economic hardship. Or he could choose a different path, one of negotiation and compromise, hoping to secure his regime's survival through diplomacy rather than military might. The stakes were high, and the future uncertain. The relationship between China and North Korea, once seemingly unbreakable, was now in uncharted territory. The world watched and waited, wondering which path Kim Jong-un would choose and what the consequences would be for the Korean peninsula and the wider region. The relationship between China and North Korea has long been a source of fascination and speculation for the international community. On the surface, they present a united front, bound by history, ideology, and a shared distrust of the West. But behind this facade of unity lies a complex web of mistrust, strategic calculation, and simmering resentment. As we've seen, the alliance between these two nations is not built on a foundation of unwavering loyalty, but rather on a precarious balance of power, shared interests, and mutual suspicion. China, the elder sibling, has long sought to control and contain its unpredictable neighbor, fearing the consequences of a nuclear-armed North Korea on its doorstep. North Korea, fiercely independent and wary of being a puppet state, resents China's influence and seeks to assert its autonomy on the world stage. This tense dance between two proud nations has played out over decades, marked by periods of cooperation and conflict, moments of warmth followed by icy silence. The assassination of Kim Jong-nam, the escalation of North Korea's nuclear and missile programs, and China's subsequent shift in policy have brought this relationship to a crossroads. The question remains, what does the future hold for this fragile alliance? Will China continue to stand by its unpredictable ally, or will the weight of North Korea's nuclear ambitions and defiance prove too great a burden to bear? The answer, as with most things in geopolitics, is far from simple. China faces a difficult choice. Abandoning North Korea completely could lead to the collapse of the regime, triggering chaos, instability, and a potential refugee crisis on its border. A scenario Beijing is desperate to avoid. However, continuing to support Pyongyang unconditionally risks emboldening Kim Jong-un further, potentially leading to a conflict that could engulf the entire region. The coming years will be critical. The decisions made in Beijing and Pyongyang will have profound implications not just for these two nations, but for the stability of Northeast Asia and the wider world. Will this alliance, forged in the fires of the Korean War, survive the test of time? Or will it crumble under the weight of its own contradictions, leaving behind a legacy of mistrust and the specter of conflict?